today we've got a great mixture of panellists featuring voices from traditional broadcasters and big players in the digital space. And we're going to hear some thoughts on how digital disruption has changed not only the way audiences listen to radio, but the way that we market artists and loads of other things. So first of all, I'm going to invite the panellists to say a few words about themselves and what they do. So Claudia, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Claudia. I am the VP of Creative Content and Programming at Vevo in the UK. Vevo is obviously a music video platform. We have 275,000 music videos on the site, which each month garner 23 billion streams globally. We work with a huge number of artists from every level of the music industry, right through from their first single to hopefully their 10th album. And really we focus on not only music video, but also artist development and building original content as well around the artists that we work with day to day.
Hi, my name is Dusko Justic. I am VP of International Marketing at Sony Music International. I've been leading marketing campaigns for non-US and non-UK signings such as Kygo, Martin Garrix, and Enrique Iglesias over the past few years. And broadcast and visual content has been very important for us. As the landscape is more and more fragmented, it's important for us to create content specific to certain fan bases.
I'm Kellie While. I'm head of creative at 7 Digital. In the creative team, we are mostly making radio programming for BBC. That's the majority of what we do. Across all the BBC music and speech networks. We also have a team, Entertainment News, who are providing show business news out to commercial radio stations. And I also manage the team who are looking after content management and curation for our download stores across the globe.
Hello, I'm Sean Adams. I'm a social media producer for 6 Music, which means I post on Facebook and Twitter and make GIFs and social video and things like that to try and reflect what the station does day to day, week to week. And 6 Music is quite a unique radio station. I guess you talked about it being traditional radio, but it's one of the only digital-only radio stations, the biggest digital-only station in the world. It's listened to by 2.3 million people every week, and they listen for about 8 to 9 hours on average. And we have hosts on the station that include Iggy Pop, Keris Matthews from Catatonia, Lauren Laverne, and various others. My background previously is I've come from much more of a digital world. I started the music website Drowned in Sound, and I also have managed artists and run a record label.
So even from what you're saying there, Sean, about digital only, it's clear that digital has ignited a step change in the industry, and consumers and listeners are listening to things in their own terms, whether it be videos, albums, on-demand radio. So first of all, kind of like starting with you, like each of the panellists, just talk about what broadcast means to them and how it's affecting the landscape today.
Well, I guess for me, radio broadcast has been something that I've always sat late at night in bed listening to Marianne Hobbs and Steve Lamacq, and radio's always been there as a companion for me, so it's been quite nice to get a job doing this and being so close to something that's brought so much music into my life. But I think the way in which radio's changed and what I do primarily at the moment is driving people to catch-up shows, to push people to kind of exclusive events. Like, for instance, recently we played the new Mogwai album in full the day before it came out on the radio, which isn't something that's radio traditionally would do, but I think now we can create events and kind of communal kind of moments around music, which is quite unique. And I think that I guess the way in which broadcast is changing, there's like little things where tracks obviously don't have 6 weeks and then they're released of being on the radio. We now have a segment on Lauren Laverne's show called Just Added, which is literally a track that's just been added to streaming services, gets played on the radio. Often it gets played and then it's added to the streaming services afterwards. So I guess there's elements like that where radio's adapting around the digital landscape.
And Dusko, from your perspective, from a label's perspective, what is the function of broadcast and marketing?
When I started in the music business, there were only basically 2 channels for broadcasting. It was radio and music television. And it's changed quite a lot over the years. And it's become so splintered, and to Sam's point, in terms of events, we're working more and more closely with partners such as radio. For example, we work very closely with our partner NRJ in both France and Germany, where they're hosting events, and we're lining up our radio and single releases with their events. So, it's not just looking at radio, but we're looking at multi-marketing touch points across the platform.
And do you usually do a lot to market fresh talent, or is it usually established talent?
Both. It's fresh and established.
Okay. And what about your perspective? Obviously, Vevo is a digital publisher.
Yeah, so we're kind of coming actually from the other side of things, really. Obviously, Vevo in its origin is a VOD platform, and that's where we see a huge amount of traffic across the content that we make. But actually, we're almost like reverse engineering that. So there's still a big element of curation across the site, which is something that we want to do personally using the people that we have in-house at the business. I think obviously there's an element of like algorithmic, but we want to keep that personal touch and that personal expertise and like creativity. And I suppose also now when thinking about like original content, we're trying to think about how we can create those kind of like live moments as well. So we're giving people the chance to watch things as and when they want, but we're also serving them more of a kind of sit back experience at the same time. So really, I think it's about having those two things run alongside each other and give value to artist campaigns in both instances, where you can get that real engagement digitally when you have a live stream or when you have a music video drop on the platform, and then you have a longevity of that engagement as well, where people come to it from a VOD perspective, having picked it up maybe in socials or through conversations with friends or GIFs or memes or whatever else, So I think really like there's kind of the two elements that you really want to run kind of at the same time, and I suppose Vevo comes at it from one direction, whereas maybe traditional radio would come at it from another.
And Kellie, you're helping create this content for radio, so what's your take?
So I think we've heard a lot today about how the challenges the music industry is facing. It's clear to me how the radio industry is facing all the same challenges, how radio programming and content is made, how it's distributed, how it's consumed, and also the role that data plays in it as well. So I think just primarily the role of radio, it sounds very basic, very straightforward, but really is just to both inform and to entertain. And I think as we look at music, we've got 100 million tracks available. How do we navigate our way through that? What do we do? How do we know what to listen to? The role of curation, I think that's where radio still remains really relevant in how we tell stories around music, the context we provide, and all of those things. I think more than ever, that community that's created around it is still a really important role.
And Sean, the industry is obviously continuing to change, as we've already touched on, but BBC is quite a traditional broadcaster. So, in your day-to-day job, how are you innovating to make sure that you keep listeners engaged online?
Well, quite a lot of that is my role as running the social accounts to ensure that people are engaged. And it's quite interesting coming in as an outsider to look at some of the very traditional ways. Like text messaging is still one of the biggest ways people communicate with the stations. But since I've been there, I've managed to kind of reignite the audience on the Facebook account. And we get it's a lot of posts with like 2,000 responses, which is on most across the BBC accounts. That's quite a kind of rare number to kind of see on replies. I think if you look at a lot of media publishers, they're not a lot of them that have got. Having run a message board for years, it's kind of taking that concept of a community and firing off questions that are going to trigger people wanting to show off their knowledge and hope to get their favourite song played on the radio and listened to by people that maybe never heard it before. So I think there's definitely a sense. A lot of the presenters are absolutely brilliant because they've worked 10, 20, 30 years and they know what the audience are going to react to. So, for instance, on Sunday this week, Nihal, who does a lot of talk radio, was sitting in for Marianne Hobbs, and he literally posed the question, what's the greatest drumming moment in a song ever? And there were hundreds of tweets, hundreds of Facebook messages within minutes, because everyone's got a favourite drumming moment in a song. And presenters, they know how to engage that audience and to kind of to feed the debate and fuel the conversation.
And is that feedback always useful? Previously you would have to call into a radio station to be like, I don't like this song or I don't like this album, but now you can do it in the click of a button. I
think it was interesting last night. I was working on the Mercury Prize, and you can see the responses that come in, and some of them, the presenters want things to read out on the radio which are rich and interesting and insightful from the audience, and when people just write a band name exclamation mark of who they think is going to win, it it's not really the fuel for presenters. But when you get people that respond really in depth or vividly, or obviously if they're swearing and things, that doesn't get passed across. But you can see that the volume of responses last night, even just during the Mercury Prize, it's too much to kind of filter through. But there's definitely, you see, people love the radio and they love the presenters. And when I've worked on radio too, the way in which the audience really want the presenters to kind of be aware of them. It's similar to like looking at like Lady Gaga's Twitter account or something. It's like that kind of love of the hosts.
And Dusko, from the perspective of Sony, how are labels changing the way that they work with broadcasters versus streaming sites to market artists?
I think, no matter whichever way you look at it, it's how are we increasing the level of engagement with fans and consumers? From a traditional perspective, if it is radio, how are we involving the artist and the music early on? How are we engaging the radio broadcaster and introducing them to the music ahead of the release, and then trying to figure out a strategy of how can we perhaps invite the artist down to the radio station to do a dedicated show upon the release, and then bleeding that out to streaming platforms. And also another important area that I like to highlight is how are we leveraging the artist's social platforms and making sure that the artist is driving people back to the traditional broadcast or streaming platforms so that they can engage with the music.
And we spoke a lot about radio, but in the middle of this change, how is the role of the music video changing?
I don't think the role of the music video has changed, but I think the way that we engage with music videos has changed. Obviously, music videos have an absolutely enormous audience. And when you think about kind of people like Taylor Swift recently breaking like the Vevo record, she had 30 million views in 24 hours. That's a real kind of event now within the industry itself. So I think it's really the way that people consume and engage those videos. I think the passion for music video has always been there. And really music videos are kind of going to have that longevity because they offer three things for artists, which really come down to creative expression. When you look at stats around things like Despacito, like the biggest track obviously of this year, the most streamed track of all time within a 6-month window, we noticed that actually that was also the fastest ever music video to reach 2 billion views. So that was over a 154-day period. So there is that correlation. People want to go out and find the visual that correlates to a song for that kind of deeper meaning and resonance with the track itself. And then I think really it's about how that culture of music videos expresses itself then through the day-to-day kind of interactions of people. We did some research recently that saw that 40% of people will share kind of music video content to really talk more about who they are as a person. And it's around like people then like seeing that content in their news feeds and engaging with it, and then maybe going back to watch other videos that friends may suggest and kind of tracking those journeys really. So I think the music video itself hasn't changed, but really it's the way that we kind of interact with it and want to continue doing so, and the way that we then kind of take that asset and use it in our own communication, which makes a difference.
And Taylor Swift's quite a good example of how a music video can go viral like very quickly. There's a story behind that. It's trending on Twitter. So, for Sony, our music videos, do you plan this out from the start of a single launch, or are they an afterthought? Does it depend on the artist?
If I think back to 6, 7, even 10 years ago, the music video was an afterthought. It was mainly because we couldn't gain an ROI on a music video. It was just way too expensive, and we couldn't engage an audience with the music video. Now, fast forward to today, music video is an essential marketing tool to the plan. So we do think about music videos way in advance, particularly with Latin repertoire, as we've seen with Despacito. Music videos are more and more important in terms of engaging an audience. But not only that, not only in creating an official music video, we're thinking pre, during, and post. So creating additional content, shooting extra content so that we can feed the audience and drive that traffic.
And Kellie, you're a storyteller, so a big theme this year and last year was, visual albums, obviously things like Lemonade, stuff like that. What do you think about those?
Well, I think just bringing it back to to broadcast for a second into the radio, it's we going back say 10, 15 years, we didn't do anything at all. The radio networks weren't interested in visualized content. I hate this expression, visualization, we have to call it now, not
You have
telly.
a head of visualization at radio, don't
We
you?
have a head of radio, head of visualization at radio. And also, is that the word radio even, we're sort of not allowed to say that now, aren't we? It's audio now. And then it's sort of become one of those words where I think, but yeah, now, I mean, with the part and parcel of programming radio content, when we put together pitches for programs, when we're entering into tendering processes to retain and win new strands, the visualized content is just as important as the audio, and I've really noticed that change a lot in the last few years. And it might not necessarily be just a webcam pointing at a radio show, which is we thought that was really exciting some years ago, and now we've gone beyond that. But it's, you know, probably some of the most engaging posts on a station like Radio 2 will be a 30-second clip of Ken Bruce in his panto or Jeremy Vine doing his daft dancing. It's not even necessarily connected to the programmes at all. It's all about radio networks being able to get their brands out in all the places where they need to be, strengthening their brands everywhere else, which then it's all about driving traffic back to their product.
But then also some of one of Radio 2's biggest properties is the Sound of the 80s TV show, which is also a radio show which Sarah Cox hosts. And Six Music have done something similar. Steve Lamacq hosted a best videos of the 90s, and Huey Morgan did a hip hop compilation around a hip hop season that we did. And those ran on the iPlayer, and they were huge. They had huge viewing numbers on the red button and on the iPlayer. And they introduced maybe people within the BBC or externally to, this is the expertise we've got and this is the kind of music that we like. And it might not look like innovation if you watched MTV2 in the 90s, but it's those compilations and bringing that kind of into a visual world where people might just want to sit back and watch something to then go, actually, I might now want to listen to this 3-hour radio show every Saturday morning. So I think it's a way in which radio is innovating to expand its audience.
It's such a simple idea. We've got a presenter, a load of records from the 80s, but let's just play the videos and point some cameras at it. The value they're getting is incredible.
And then you throw in Aha and you've got...
Alison Moyet, Jonty Gooden.
And I guess this is all made easier by the fact everyone has a TV in their hand now.
Yeah.
How is Vevo capitalising on mobile?
The majority of our views come through mobile, so it's something that we, actively kind of pursue in the way that we think about building our apps out. The other area that we've seen a lot of growth is connected TVs, but we still get a decent share of viewership across desktop also. And then, as I said, I think it's then like trying to kind of take that content out of like a Vevo player and see where else we can get that to exist. So that's where it comes to things like memes or GIFs. It's where people are then sharing that content within other channels that they control themselves. But really, I think it's about being reactive and offering people the chance to kind of engage with artists and to use the access that we have as a platform to offer fans the ability to do that. So we've recently kind of like started venturing more into the live space with a kind of live chat function within the app, which allows people to kind of have that direct access through a visual medium, but also engage in that immediacy like within the chat itself.
And how are Sony using platforms like, mobile platforms, Snapchat, Instagram to market artists?
I think it's just that. I mean, and it's two things. It's offering the opportunity for the artist to tell a story via these platforms, but also being reactive and just gauging consumers' reactivity to the content and then creating additional content on top of that.
And do you find some platforms work better than others? So Snapchat kind of gives a behind-the-scenes view.
Snapchat, Instagram has been a very good platform for us in terms of creating content and engagement.
Okay. And what about you, Sean? What platforms do you use most?
Well, with the demographics that Six Music's got, Instagram's been our fastest growing platform. I think it's grown in nearly 50,000 people in a year, which for an account that only had 30,000 followers is quite a big growth. We see Facebook reach often 3-4 times the number of people that follow the account. So it's regularly over 1 million people seeing what we're doing on Facebook each week. So there's lots of, those two platforms are probably the key ones. I think Twitter as a way of generating user interaction is really good, but for driving traffic, it's still not, it's never been the greatest platform for sending traffic because that's not what people use Twitter for. And I think we'll probably see in the next few months a few other platforms kind of rise up a little bit more. I can see Medium being used a lot more by a certain type of audience. It might work around a certain type of kind of radio product, and I think there's probably, it feels like we're in the moments where a new platform must be due, because the frustrations with the different platforms is starting to reach a bit of a peak. And I think the way in which Twitter's now introduced a $99 to ensure more people see your tweets function, and Facebook reach organically is, for most accounts, is dropped quite significantly, and they keep tinkering with it. I think audiences are frustrated with the platform as much as probably the shareholders that are forcing ads straight to the top of the feeds.
And as a program making tool, kind of on the other side of it, Facebook and Twitter are great, but there's so much of it that when you're in a live situation producing a radio show and you're looking for comments, sometimes it can be overwhelming, the amount of traffic coming through. So it's easier to look at, we talked about text messages, but to look at text coming in, it's quite difficult to navigate your way through the stuff you don't want to talk about. But because Six Music is such a music-focused network. Yeah. It's so music-focused. I think that's probably why you find Instagram a really good tool. Network like Radio 2 is very much more entertainment-based, and so I think Facebook is by far the biggest social tool for them. Anyway.
Okay. And just coming back to streaming, so earlier on when we were having a chat before the panel, we were talking about, people are like, streaming is the death of radio, and like all these big headlines, but actually the latest radar figures say that 89% of people in the UK still listen to radio. So do we think that streaming is actually aiding radio?
I think I've wrote it down because I was pretty blown away by it. There was 11.5 million people listened to Radio 4 in the last Radar quarter, which is their biggest quarter ever. And to think that a station like Radio 4 is still growing and reaching peaks in audience is pretty massive. Six Music's now up to 2.3 million listeners, and when it was threatened with closure about 7-8 years ago, it was about 500,000. So I think, if anything, streaming's creating more fans of music and allowing people to explore and be more curious. And I think because of that, they're then looking for solutions to, I guess, choice paralysis was the word that was going around about a decade ago, about the where your brain empties when you look into the search box and you can turn the radio on and someone with expertise is going to feed you music. So I think we can see that radio's not going anywhere, and if not, possibly is benefiting from a greater appetite for music.
And similarly with TV, is Vevo working on more original content and things like that?
We've got a really kind of established original content proposition. So we work across multiple parts of the music industry, both with emerging artists in kind of live performance areas. We do several live events as well, which are filmed, and then we also have a lot of kind of like narrative content that we do. So I think it's about continuing to develop that and adding kind of storytelling, hosts, curation, and expertise to what is then a premium kind of music video environment. So hopefully when fans come into the site, they may come in through like a music video, but then there's like a lot of additional content that they can explore. And I think looking at the music video itself, there's so much kind of rich information around that, and really when you get a great music video, it becomes a huge talking point culturally. We've definitely seen that over the last few years, and I think that fans are really kind of actively engaged in that and want to know more about the kind of choices that artists have made within their music videos. Obviously, several artists use music videos as a place where they can really have a say and make some real statements about where they're at kind of within their own careers, or certain things that may have kind of happened to them, and they become real social talking points. So that's something that as a platform we want to kind of encourage and to build programming around as well.
And in terms of platforms like Vevo and Spotify, this has made it more likely that people will listen to things like playlists instead of linear listening, like a full album. Does that make it a bit trickier to market an album?
No, I mean, when you think about streaming and video platforms, they usually are the first step in the marketing mix, where we are coming up with playlisting and video strategies. But to your earlier point, radio is also an important part to the mix. So we're starting with video and streaming strategies, but also leading into, we want to use those stories to build a story for radio.
And what about TV ads? I know there's been a few big ones recently, you know, with Adele doing like the teaser during X Factor a couple of years ago. Is TV still a big part of the mix for you?
TV is a big part, but more for the older audience and for the artists that can speak to that older audience, or for compilation albums. You know, market like Germany, we still sell quite a lot of compilations, so we would run TV ads, but less and less important as years passed.
And kind of, what do we think is going to happen to the space in the next 18 months? We've talked about how fragmented it's becoming. You know, like, what do you guys think?
Well, I think we can see the kind of Netflix model and the Amazon Prime kind of creating content models taken off. Facebook are introducing their own watch section, which I think is live in America. And I think the platforms becoming broadcasters is always the point when they have to decide whether they're a media company or a platform that, and I think that's been something which for a long time, I think Spotify have not ever gone in that direction, and I don't think Vevo really make music videos for people, but you might make sessions, and that's quite a different space. But I can't imagine, for instance, radio stations commissioning albums to then play on the radio, because then that would be quite but I think we're not necessarily at a point where media ownership and media platforms have quite figured out where the lines blur.
Yeah, and I think they will get better and better at it. I mean, we heard this phrase, I think there was the Director General of the BBC came up with about 2 years ago, which is everybody wants to be the Netflix of audio.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's really quite worked out how to do it yet. We've seen Audible launch their channel service, and we're yet to find out. I think where traditional broadcast radio, and can't really speak about TV because I haven't worked in TV, but I imagine it's very similar, really comes into its own is the whole live thing and building that community. We still look to traditional broadcasting around all our major cultural events, whether that's a royal wedding or a general election or Glastonbury or whatever it might be. And I think that's where it's still, I can't see how that's going to change coming up. It's somewhere where we can feel part of a community. And I think, a big challenge for radio is keeping hold of it. So the biggest challenge radio has is how to entice younger audiences onto its platforms. They're just not working out how to do that yet. So I think that's its biggest challenge, is to attract and retain younger listeners.
Why do you think younger listeners, aren't attracted to radio just now?
Because I just think it's because there's so much choice. And we know from research that we hear and see that the perception of radio, of certain radio stations, Radio 3, Radio 4, is that it's for old people. And I think there's an issue around how a lot of the radio networks brand themselves. The commercial stations are more successful at that.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I don't, as far as the BBC is concerned, I don't think it's the BBC's job necessarily to attract more listeners than commercial radio for its sake. It has a very different role to do, obviously being publicly funded and so on. But like Sean said earlier, the radar, everyone knows what radar is, I'm sure. So how the radio industry gathers data, pan industry gathering, just showed a really strong quarter. And really interestingly, all the speech networks for Q2 posted higher audiences, and some of the music networks were slightly down. And I don't know if this is a BBC spin or if it happens to be true, but we think that that's probably because of things like the general election and the Grenfell Tower, and when these big news things happen, people are drawn to speech radio, and it just shifts a bit.
That's interesting. Yeah. And further to Sean's point, are music videos next on the agenda for people?
We actually commissioned our first ever music video this year with Georgia Smith, and that was an opportunity for us really to work with an artist who is independent, and it was a really significant music video for her. It was for the track Beautiful Little Fools, which she actually released on International Women's Day. And I think, that's something that is a really kind of interesting space that Vevo could develop into. And then we've just got to think about, what that strategy is and how that's going to work. But really, we try and support artists at multiple stages of their careers. So at that point, we had already worked with Georgia and filmed a session with her. We'd worked on a live event with her, and that felt like the next step that we could take with her as an artist. So I think there's definitely some room for kind of like scope there. But I think when you're talking about what the future is, really the key, I think, is to think about the audience. The music industry and the way that the audience receives it is a really fractured and sometimes quite confusing place. If you want to listen to certain artists, you have to be a member of certain platforms and you have to pay for certain subscriptions here and there. And I think what we need to try and do is get to a place where people have access to the material that the artists that they love are creating. And that's something that we're trying to kind of like really think about at Vevo and how we can offer that.
And what's Sony's priority going forward, in terms of streaming, broadcast? What's on your agenda?
I think we're going to see a couple important things happening over the next few months and few years. First and foremost, I think artists are going to have to step up and really take ownership of their social channels. In the years past, artists were responsible primarily for recording their music and performance. Now that the social channels sometimes are larger than some of the broadcast partners, we need to embrace that and make sure that the artists are engaging their fan base. Secondly, I think with the emergence and the popularity of AI, VR, 3D, 360, we're going to be creating more and more immersive experiences for the fan base wherever they're sitting in the world.
And does Sony have like an innovation hub or anything that is invested in technologies like VR, 360 video?
We do. Yeah, we do in certain parts of the world. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And in the news this week, seen Spotify had the exclusives to Sam Smith's new video, and what they'd done is it was in a vertical format and they had weaved it through like a playlist. Do you think Spotify are going to do Netflix and become content creator? No.
I'm sure they hope so. I haven't seen it, so okay. I can't see. I know there have been. It doesn't. I know there have been challenges in how to kind of put that kind of content in a platform like that in a way that is user friendly, and I haven't seen this one.
I think it would be more interesting if Spotify, as someone that previously curated quite a lot of playlists, valued the curation element as much as the music that was put in there.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people creating some really great playlists, and it's quite difficult to build a business or an audience off the back of people with great expertise and great knowledge. That I think they're more likely to do a little bit more of what they've done with, I think Rob DeBank did Best of All Radio, which was a playlist with commentary. I think Pop Justice did a few playlists with commentaries, and I think that could be, for them, they're also, it looks like they're investing in some ways into podcasts. Not quite sure exactly how that's working, but I can see that as audio content seems like things they can own and market, and that their audience might be interested in. That's maybe not quite as complicated as music rights and publishing and all the other wonderful factors that go into music rights licensing, which I'm sure many people in this room love to hate.
In terms of this creation element, Vevo, do you guys let the community create playlists, or is that something that?
Yeah. So we offer both elements of that. There's personal curation opportunities in the site. So we have tools where people can build playlists, and we've actually recently introduced a function called Watch Party, in which you can build a room and invite friends to come into that room with you on the platform, and then you can vote in music videos to play like in a sequence playlist. So there's opportunities where you can either have a room where you're the only person that can edit, so you can invite people in and create a playlist which people can then listen to, or you can have an option where people can vote tracks up and down. So essentially it can mean that you can kind of like have a digital space in which your friends can curate playlists for different opportunities. So the idea is that hopefully groups of friends who aren't in the same location can come together of an evening and watch a set of music videos around a certain theme, and that's also got some really kind of exciting possibilities moving forward. And the other aspect that we're also working with on that part is a kind of Watch Party live element where we're bringing artists in to do this in the space themselves in a video capacity. So they're kind of playing videos through the Watch Party, and then fans can kind of interact with that as well. So curation is like a big part of what we want to do, and it's something that I think from a visual medium is quite different, obviously, to a playlisting capacity on an audio platform.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I want to turn to the audience and find out if you guys have any questions for our panellists. So stick your hand up if you do, and I think someone will come around with the mic.
Hi, Thanks for the panel. I thought it was really interesting, and there was a lot of, from all points of view, you guys talked a lot about curating content that's original, that's in demand for your audiences. But I'm just very curious about the commercial side of it, because curating your own original content, of course, does not come cheap nor free. How do you strike a balance between curating original content that is not extremely expensive, yet at the same time not drowning your entire airtime with ad plays? Like, how do you strike a balance there?
Well, obviously Vevo is an ad-funded model, so the majority of our revenue comes through the ad spaces that are purchased around music video content. It's also a revenue stream for the labels. So I think within that, earlier I was talking about allowing audiences to have access to a full catalogue, and that comes kind of at a price of serving ads against some of the music video catalogue that we have. I think we go to as many extremes as possible to make sure that that's not something which is overrun with ads, and we work on a system where a certain number of ads will play per sequential number of videos that you watch on the platform. And there are also certain spaces where we kind of limit ads if we feel like they're going to interrupt with like the editorial element of an audience's kind of participation in the site. So I think it's obviously just part and parcel. Like if you want a free service, then there's going to have to be like an ad-funded element to it. But I think generally at Vevo, what we try to do is really invest in curation from a kind of personal and like musical expert kind of sense. And then also with the original content that we make, that's a massive part of our strategy and something that we really want to get behind and build on. So there are things which are kind of top of our priorities when it comes to like looking at our business model.
I guess to the other end of the extreme, the BBC isn't ad-funded and is funded by the TV licence. And so it has a very different remit and the ads that you hear are mostly promoting other shows on the station or promoting other activity, maybe across the rest of the BBC. I think I only ever hear the word content at events like this. I don't think I've ever heard anyone at the BBC talk about content. They've got presenters, they've got shows, they've got music to play. I think in the digital landscape, I know that content is a good catch-all, but I think it's important to remember that the music that we're playing is created by human beings that have gone through lots often to create the music that we're listening to that affects us so emotionally. So I think calling it content, often when it becomes content marketing, you're not necessarily thinking about what it is that you're trying to reach people with. And I think a lot of what I look at each day and each week is around what are the things that we're excited about at the moment and how do we reach the right audience with each show. So for instance, if Iggy Pop plays a band on the radio for the first time, making sure that band are aware, because that's a pretty cool thing to have happened. If Josh Homme is going to appear on CBeebies, can I get hold of an image because that's really exciting? Can I make sure that people know? And I would kind of prove right that a lot of people were as excited about that as I was. And I think looking at what you represent and who it might reach, and I guess possibly within the question you were asking, is it about kind of things you're creating and making sure that they reach other people? I guess it's finding the right metadata to get those touch points, sending it maybe to somewhere that seems a bit out of the ordinary, where maybe if it's music, people aren't being bombarded with music. I managed a musician a few years ago, and I think the technology section of The Guardian covered her before she had any music coverage. Because she was making homemade music on GarageBand, which I thought was really punk rock. So I just sent it to tech writers because I thought if we get some tech press, the music press might pay attention, and it was much easier to get tech press with a musician doing something interesting. So I think looking at curation and kind of marketing in a different way is probably quite useful, to not just go for this needs to be on this playlist.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for, but do let us know when Josh is on CBeebies.
It's on the 6th of October.
Okay.
He's reading Zog.
Zog.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much to our great panellists. Give them a round of applause.